It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. David Quaker and I are here from the U.S. Census Bureau. I'll be speaking and leading you through a bunch of live demo and examples that you can do on your own. And David is my phone a friend expert in the chat who's going to drop links and answer any questions that you might have. Please know that we will be able to follow up with you. I know we have a list of attendees, so hopefully this isn't the only time you'll need us, but we are available for presentations, both virtual and in person. So in terms of my background, Dave and I are both data dissemination specialists. We serve the New York region. I work mostly in New York City, where I live, and my job is, and David's job is to educate the public about how to access and use census data. I was a partnership specialist during the 2020 census, so I spent 2.5 years helping us count everyone once, only once, and in the right place, and then moved on to being a data dissemination specialist. Just to give you a sense, there are only roughly 30 of us data dissemination specialists across the entire country. During the decennial census, I was one of 1,500 on the partnership staff. So we're a little leaner and meaner in between those decennial census decade years. In terms of what we'll cover today, we'll look at Census Bureau data and programs. We'll find census data quickly with census narrative profiles. I'll give a short introduction to one of our data equity tools called My Community Explorer. And then we'll look at what I call the bedrock of census data, which is data.census.gov. Where we'll do more live demonstration, and there'll be some hands-on examples throughout that you'll be able to access and do on your own. So it's helpful to have a computer or tablet handy to do those exercises, if you can. There's even one you can do on the phone. And we'll also take some Q&A. So David will be looking at the Q&A as I'm moving through the presentation. So in terms of starting and a little bit about the Census Bureau, we are the federal government's largest statistical agency, one of 17. The Census Bureau falls under the Department of Commerce. We do things other than that one giant, largest peacetime operation of the government, the decennial census. We also conduct more than 130 censuses and surveys each year. We'll talk more about the decennial and the American Community Survey. And I also just wanted to mention that we do the economic census every 5 years. So we recently collected data from businesses during 2022. So that data is currently being released. And our mission is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people and economy. So in terms of those primary uses of the decennial census, it's mandated by the Constitution that the census determines the distribution of congressional seats to states. It's used to define legislative, school districts, and much more. And another thing people really know the census for is that it helps to inform how more than $2.8 trillion in federal funds are distributed to local, state, and tribal governments each year. We used to use the number $675 billion, but we did a little more digging and found out that the true number is $2.8 trillion. So in between the time when we do the decennial census, we also do population estimates so that we factor in birth, death, and migration data for each of the states so that we can make sure that we're distributing that $2.8 trillion accurately. This is the census historical apportionment map. This is a data visualization. You can see on the left how you can see the different decades, and it's currently highlighting apportionment. You can also look at population and how the population has changed, but one is interrelated to the other. After the 2020 census, you can see New York is in orange. The states in orange lost 1 seat. whereas the states in blue gained seats and the states in gray had no change. So New York had 26 seats after the 2020 census. So if you play around with this apportionment map, you can look back to after 1930 was the last time that New York gained seats. And we gained 2 seats to have a total of 45 seats in Congress in 1930. So this is just an interesting historical perspective on population and apportionment. Moving on from the decennial census, we're going to go deep talking about the American Community Survey. Back in 2000, there was a long and a short form of the decennial census. People either got a 1-page form or an 8-page form. After 2000 and 2010, 2020, moving forward, we are only doing the short form of the decennial census. However, we implemented, starting in 2004, an annual survey that was sent to that's sent every year, randomly sampled to 3.5 million households in the United States, to every county in the US. It covers 35 topics, over 35 topics. It has 72 questions, and those estimates, so estimate because it's a survey as opposed to a census, which is a head count, those estimates are released annually twice a year in September and December. And we'll talk a little more about the difference between the 1-year release and the 5-year estimated data. So just to give you a sense of what that survey actually looks like physically, you can see the questionnaire on the right. I wanted to specifically highlight how in the past we have looked at race data. And we've looked at Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin separately from race. And you can see there are blank slots, so there's a lot of capacity for people who are taking these surveys to write in their responses. And then we tabulate all of that data. So this is how we currently ask about race. However, we've been working with the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. They have an interagency technical working group on race and ethnicity standards. And what's happening now is we are considering combining that race and ethnicity question. So on the right, you can see a very different look to that question because Hispanic or Latino is incorporated into the one question. And also you can see a separate category breakout for Middle Eastern or North African. In terms of implementation of these possible new standards, the standards are due to be approved in the summer of 2024, and then it will take the Census Bureau time to implement various revisions. But this is an example of what it might look like. So we are looking to better survey the nation. With those American Community Survey period estimates, the important thing to know is that for 1-year estimates, so if you want to see data year over year and compare data year over year, you're looking at ACS 1-year estimates for geographies of 65,000 or more. So if you're in New York City, right, that's not a big deal, because if you wanted to look at borough level data, that's over 65, well over 65,000 with 8.8 million people in New York City. But if you were looking at a smaller geography like a census tract, which is on average about 4,000 in terms of size, you'd be looking at 5-year American Community Survey estimates. So that's 1 year versus 5-year. And to see a little bit about how that, I'm just taking myself off video because I'm going to go live soon, about how those geographies may nest within one another. This is a geographic hierarchy. So you can see where certain big geographies, the census tract nests within the county, which nests within the state, which nests in the nation, is a part of the nation. whereas some geographies like metropolitan and micropolitan areas may span several states. There are numerous other geographies that are not shown here. Two things I want to highlight on this next slide is the public use microdata area geography. So especially for those of you who are looking at New York City data, those public use microdata areas, or PUMAs, will map to community board districts. So some of them are combined into 2 community board districts, but most of them are one-to-one. So that's thanks to a partnership with New York City Planning. In addition, when you're looking for city data or town data, you want to look at the place geography. So that place geography correlates to cities. And our word for zip code is zip code tabulation area. So just know, don't worry about the tabulation area part. That's just our way of showing the aerial view of where the Postal Service route is. So zip code is trademarked by the Post Office, and zip code tabulation area is trademarked by the US Census Bureau. So you might be wondering, I showed you one example of race data being collected. Well, what other topics are available? So you can see here the breakdown of topics and major categories of social, demographic, economic, and housing data. I've indicated right next to each category these DP numbers, DP02, DP05, et cetera. Those are data profile tables. They're incredibly rich tables. And just I'm highlighting the number because you can use our search bar on data.census.gov to go straight to those tables. If you find a table you like, my colleagues and I like to say that you should write down that table number or copy that URL, and it can really get you right back to where you were looking for the data. So here's the wealth of information, and we'll do some targeted searches so you can see how to pull up that data. This is just a handy list of some of our different tools. While I'm not focused on economic data, I am giving you the link to Census Business Builder. We do trainings of all of these different tools. Today, we are going to focus just on a few of them. So now we'll get into our first hands-on use of census data by looking at American Community Survey 5-year estimates in the form of census narrative profiles. So I'm going to look at what is the percent of people in poverty for 197 East Broadway, which is on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I'm just going to pull up. So how did I get here? How did I get to this page? Honestly, I put census narrative profile into Google, and this is what came up. It comes up first. We have a wonderful website called census.gov, which is a little more complicated to find these tools. There's a list of about 50 tools, but if you know the name of the tool you're looking for, this is the most direct way to get to it. And David is going to kindly drop a link to this tool in the chat. You can see that you can access data back to 2015. And the nice thing in the last 2 years is we added this use address lookup feature. So while you could look by geography, by these different types of geographies, I'm going to click address lookup and put in 197 East Broadway, New York. And it tends to pull the zip code for me. So I'm going to click lookup address. And lo and behold, here is my data profiles for different geographies. And since I'm thinking I want to go down and visit this neighborhood, I really want to get a sense of what's in the immediate area, what's in the census tract level at around 4,000 people. So I click view narrative profile, and then I give myself a second or two as the data loads. And what you'll see is it's literally a narration of what it's like in that area based on census data. You can view the data in table format, or you can close the table view. But another thing I want to highlight here is that all of this data is free and yours for the picking. It is yours to analyze, it's yours to export. I know grant writers who will take snapshots of our data and maps and use them in their grant proposals. So that's just an important thing to know. In addition to my and David's services, when we come and do presentations at organizations and city agencies, it's all provided free of charge. So I'm scrolling down here through these are the most popularly accessed categories, because I'm specifically looking at poverty in this area in the Lower East Side. This is, for those of you who are familiar with the Lower East Side, this happens to be the geography where the Manny Cantor Center is located. It's located near a substantial housing development. So you can see there's a high percent of people in poverty. But in New York City, these ratios, the data will vary tremendously sometimes from tract to tract. So I'm hoping that you can pull up the census narrative profile. And actually here, there's a QR code in case you wanted to look at it on your phone, because sometimes people like to look at this on their phone. And I'm giving you a minute to find the census narrative profile for your home, work, or school address, and see if you can find how most people commute to work. Okay, so in terms of finding where to input the address, I just see a quick question in the chat. I'm going to go back to my narrative profile, and this is going to get me back to the home screen. So the address lookup is right here on the right. If you're using a computer or tablet, it's to the right of Use Geography Selector. So if you were able to find your address and find that commuting data, including, one of the reasons I wanted to highlight the commuting data is because it includes work from home, which is a newer question that we've been asking. So hopefully everyone was able to look up their census narrative profile. And now we're going to move on to one of our data equity tools called My Community Explorer. So My Community Explorer is a newer tool. This may not be as familiar to many of you. It's where you can look at different layers in the tool to show poverty indicators, to show community resilience estimates, which are based on risk factors. So when you look at the landing page of My Community Explorer, you kind of probably look at it and think there's a lot going on here, because there is, because this is all NOAA data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So you can see here on this particular snapshot, and this changes daily. It's constantly kept up to date. You can see a couple of hurricanes coming in. You can see a lot of wildfires happening. Then you can click the layer list and you can eliminate that emergency response data. So what you're seeing here is you can see the interplay between some of the emergency response and the disasters, and how the community may be affected by those disasters through community resilience estimates. So there's a link to My Community Explorer, which Dave will drop in the chat. And this is just, you can bookmark it for later. I'm just going to gloss over it here. I'm not going too deep here. And there's also an 8-minute instructional video. But on the right will be community characteristics. So right now, this community context is for the nation. When you look at county level data, it'll be for the state. And I'll show you all that in a second. You can look at race and ethnicity profiles, or economic profiles. This one happens to be for Richmond County, also known as Staten Island. So I'm going to pull up the My Community Explorer tool back here. And I already pulled it up, but it usually takes a couple of seconds to populate. You can see I can select a state or a county, but right now I'm just going to look at this layer list and get rid of these emergency preparedness layers, so the NOAA data goes away. But what I left up are community resilience estimates from 2021. So you can see where there are different 3 or more risk factors are areas that are more brown in color, whereas yellow has 1 to 2 risk factors. Now, what are those risk factors? What are we looking at in terms of populations where there are more of these risk factors would have more difficulty in case of a disaster? So if people over age 65, those without vehicle access, high poverty, disability, communication barriers, a lack of English speaking, no broadband access, no health insurance coverage. It doesn't indicate the specific factors, but let's say we want to look at New York. And we'll look today at, we can look at Queens County. And you can see when I put in that county, it'll zoom right in. And then it'll take a few seconds to load. But when you look at what's brown on the map, those census tracts that are more brown in color are ones where there's a greater proportion of underserved population. And if you click on one of these, you can see a detailed report by Census Business Builder, but it'll give you a sense of where this compares to the national estimate in terms of population. And then on the right are characteristics for New York. And I could also look at the county, different characteristics for the counties. So I'm just giving you a little teaser on census on this My Community Explorer because it is a newer tool, which really is helpful in terms of looking at where the population is that may need to be better served. Now, back to our presentation. Oh, this is our brain break. So I think I've already been talking with and at you for a good 20 minutes here. So these are actually some stickers. And sometimes when David and I come in person, we bring stickers. Not everyone loves our stickers. David, I hope you still have some stickers left. But this is just a little break in the action. So now moving on to finding data in data.census.gov. I mentioned that you can find data from a number of different surveys and censuses. So here's a list of them here, from the American Community Survey to our population estimates and economic census. This is the landing page of data.census.gov. And you can see that there's this main single search. But sometimes when you do that main single search, you'll have thousands of tables appear. Sometimes that's a good thing. The ones that are most often accessed show up first. And then you can look at advanced search, which is something that we'll drill down into, because that will narrow your table search considerably. There are a list of topics. Those 35 plus topics are all part of these different folders. So you can click on those and get more specific. If you're looking for school enrollment data, you would click on education. If you were looking for specific race and ethnicity populations, you'd click on race and ethnicity and more. Over here on the left, you can see where there are different filters, and you'll see me use this in action in just a couple of minutes, but I want to give you this overview. And for those of you who want to look back at it, you can see in the slides here, these are the most oftenly used geographies. The ones that were most commonly accessed are at the top. But then there's a whole laundry list of other geographies that are under an all geography tab. So it's easy to find. Here's an example of what happened when I did a single search and I used disability New York City. So I got 116 tables, but this first one is really the one that's most likely going to be most interesting to me. It's disability characteristics. But just so you know, I could look at any one of those. I could shop for data in any one of those 116 tables. We also have comparative profile tables. Sometimes people are interested in, well, what does this data look like over time? So our comparative profile table didn't automatically generate this handy bar graph. I did that in Excel, but I exported the data and it was really easy. But I want to highlight here that I seem to be missing data for 2020. Well, 2020 was a very difficult time for data collection, and some of our data is suppressed for certain estimates. You may need to look for 5-year estimates during 2020 for certain data. But this happens to show gross rent as a percentage of household income, where 50% or more households in the Bronx who rent are paying 35% or more of their household income in rent. Now on to live demonstration for data.census.gov. We'll look first at some 2020 census data using the single search. So what was the total population of New York County, New York, and how does it break down according to race groups? So I'm going to put in data.census.gov, which David also will drop in the chat. How's it going there, David? And I'm going to use the single search and put in New York County, New York. And now I'm going to pause for a second while it thinks about this. And what comes up is the population in New York County or Manhattan from the 2020 census. And you can see the first table that pops up is this race table. I just click on P1. And I can minimize this, and here is that nice breakdown I was looking for. You could do this for any geography, but now we're going to go back, and that's easy peasy, right? That's the single search, no problem. We put something in, and a bunch of data comes back up. Now let's go to a more advanced example. And then I'm going to give you an advanced example to do with steps on the screen. So you'll be able to get the example in the chat and the steps on the screen. We are going to look for what is the census tract with the highest number of people receiving SNAP benefits in Kings County, New York in 2022. I'm looking for SNAP. I could have easily looked for health insurance. I could have looked at school enrollment. I could have looked at any of the topics. Today I chose SNAP or food stamp, as more commonly known as food stamp benefits. And then we're going to look at the census tracts with households below the poverty level with people not receiving SNAP. So first let's find the people receiving SNAP. So now I want to clear out this table. I'm just going to go, I could either put in data.census.gov again, or I could just go to the upper left corner here. We're going to use advanced search. And the first thing I do that David taught me was to select the year. And I'm going to select 2022. And then let's do our geography. So you always want to click on the geography that's the smallest. Even though we're looking for geography that's within a county, the smallest is we're looking for the tract that's in that county. So I look at census tract, and now I'm going to click on New York, follow the yellow brick road, click on New York. And then I wanted to get to Kings County.
How would that sound? Yeah.
So I click on Kings County, and I click on all census tracts within Kings County. And as I'm making these different selections, you can see on the left that they're populating in the filters. And the last thing was my topic, which was SNAP benefits, which falls under income and poverty. You can see how there are different subcategories. So here's income and poverty, and I find different variables. I'm looking for SNAP and food stamps. So now I can hit search in the lower right-hand corner. And I'm interested in this first table that pops up. It shows me that I'm looking at 5-year subject estimates, and I'll click on 2020-201, and what happens? Now, just know there are hundreds of census tracts in Kings County. I'm going to minimize this and click Open the Table. If you take away one thing that I've said, remember to click Open the Table. And now I have a giant spreadsheet with hundreds of tracts with data related to all of these different variables. I scrolled across down here. Oh, I click to remove the margin of error. Up here, this is known as the table ribbon. I could export to Excel, CSV, or zip. And then you can see there's a lot of data in this table. So in order to better manage this data and find what I'm looking for, I'm going to click on More Tools and Map. And now, hopefully, quickly, this map will load. You can see that all those little dividers, that's all census tracts. You can see how dense it is in the city, and then when you get to the suburbs, how much larger those census tract geographies are. I can change the color. And I wanted to know the number of people. So I'm going to click right next to select. There's a downward arrow, and I'm going to change the variable units to number. And make sure it's households receiving SNAP. And I can open this histogram. And as I drag the histogram, see how the legend dynamically changes. So this gets me to the top 4 census tracts with the largest number of people, the largest population receiving food stamps. If I click on that, I can see 3,161 people are receiving food stamps in this geography. And I can click View Profile, and it will take me right to that Census Tract 305 and where it's located, not far from Grand Army Plaza. But I want to go back to my map. So I just click the back button, and here I am again. If I wanted to share my map, I could click Share, and it would give me the URL, or you could just copy the URL up here. At this point, I want to change the variable, right? We were looking at the population that's collecting food stamps, but now let's look at the population below the poverty level. So I'm just looking through my variables here, and I'm going to click below the poverty level and see how my map changes. Not mine, actually, it's our map. And I wanted households not receiving food stamp SNAP who are below the poverty level. So this is giving me a multivariable look at this map. And I could once again move the histogram to, and also there are other things you can do with the histogram to change the way the variables display. So that just gives you a sense of how to create a thematic map using data.census.gov. And now it's your turn. So David, can you paste this, this example into the chat? It's what is the census tract with the highest population of children aged 3 to 4 years old enrolled in school in Bronx County, New York in 2022, according to the American Community Survey 5-year estimate. And then there are other exciting things that you can do, like change the color of the map and show community board district boundaries by using the boundary tab in the map ribbon, in the table map ribbon.
Jolie, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I think this would be the right place to interrupt. On the live website, somebody wants you to show how to go from the map to the table.
Of course. Hang on. Going back there. Okay, so here's the map. That's a very good question. Here's the map. If I want to get back to the table, I can click on More Tools and click on Table. When that first happens, it gives me just this one variable, but then I can click View Full Table and open the table again, and I'm back to my original table. So this is exercise number 1, and you can have 3 minutes to try this on your own. Access data.census.gov first, and then you can follow the prompts or move intuitively based on the question, whatever you'd like. Hi, everyone. So for those of you who worked on the example, you can see here where this is where hopefully some of you got to, if not all of you. If you didn't, no worries. We have a bunch of tutorials through census.gov/academy. I'll show you that link soon. Or we can certainly, David or I can do a session with your organization or agency or school classroom to show you how to better use data.census.gov. But this is the table and this is the map. So it shows you that up here in the northeastern part of the Bronx is where there's a tremendous density of 3 to 4-year-olds enrolled in school. So I know they recently remodeled the tool to make it more user-friendly, but it's a little hard to find. This is where the drop-down for the variables is. It's right to the left of this. Oh, sorry, everyone, I just lost my map. It's right to the left of this select tool is this drop-down arrow. And then you can see here where, what we've selected in terms of variable. Any other question, David? Because if I pull up the chat, I lose my...
Somebody asked if these maps can be embedded. I think the link can. I think you can grab the link, right, and embed that.
You can grab the link. I know they're working on... URL. Yeah, you can grab the link here, so you could share the URL by copying it here or just copying it right up in the browser window.
Julie, I hate to interrupt. I'm going to say, I only learned this the other day. I have not had good luck with that share button. It doesn't seem to work, but the URL at the top does.
Okay, all right, good to know. Good to know. They're constantly updating these tools. So was there any other question in the chat, David, that referred to the mapping exercise? Yes. Yeah, and one thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Please.
When you're showing the variable for the map, again, can you click on the little down arrow? Somebody asked about the number versus the percent. They maybe didn't see that. Can you show that at the bottom? Yeah, down there, just take your cursor and turn it around so they see. Yeah, so down at the bottom, you have the option, right, of going percent or number. And it changes the variables that are available.
You could also here, so you could change one of the nice things about this is you can break it down by public versus private school. So you can do percent in public school or percent in private school or a number in terms of estimate in public and break it down by public or private. Do we seem good with questions?
I think we're good.
We're good. Yeah, I know we're all right. So this is our last. So I'm giving you an overview of data.census.gov. There's more practice you can do for sure. We often will spend an hour and a half just introducing data.census.gov and the ACS, but this gives you a very good start. So the last thing that I wanted to share while we're busy sharing is something that you can access either from data.census.gov or from a data visualization. So in terms of this detailed demographic and housing characteristics file A, This is the file that shows us all of those different write-in where people wrote in their race or ethnicity, as opposed to the larger buckets that you saw in that first P1 race table we pulled. So, hang on. Here we go. So David's going to drop the link in the chat. This is how you can see things more visually through data visualizations that we produce. And I'm going to look at rankings, and I'm just going to pull up Queens, for example. So here's, and you are more than welcome to pull up any county that you'd like. I'm going to look at Hispanic or Latino and look at New York and go back to Queens. So, and I'll look at second largest demographic group. You can see this by the table, but it's actually really interesting to see it by ranking. So in Queens, I was looking at what the Ecuadorian population is, and there are a lot of people from Ecuador in Queens. Here we go. 1 second. There we go. So this just gives you that much more detailed breakdown. Now you can also find this by looking at data.census.gov. I feel like we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to go to questions in the chat and then hand it back over to Ariana. But just know that that detailed demographic and housing characteristics file A is something that you can search for in data.census.gov, and you can see this map out. You could search for all of the counties in New York State and see all of how that data breaks down by different race and ethnicities. David, someone asked, does anybody remember the American Fact Finder site?
Well, I do, but sorry, showing my age.
Many people remember American Fact Finder, which was discontinued, and data.census.gov is basically your new portal. There are other tools to access, you know, different data sets like Quick Facts, for example. If you wanted to compare 6 different place geographies or 5,000 or more, you can get a lot of facts raised that way.
I just had a question. Is there like a particular type of, like, is there a particular type of prompt you would definitely recommend we would use this data for versus like when we wouldn't, like when it might be too broad and we'd want to look at something else as a potential data source? Let me know if that didn't make sense.
I think, well, sometimes you do want to make sure when you're looking at the data sets that you produce. The nice thing about looking at data.census.gov is it shows you margin of error for all of those pre-made tables. So you would want to consider when you're looking at that data, if you're looking at smaller geographies and the margin of error is really high, then you might be less inclined to use that data and look at a larger geography. Does that make sense? But in terms of like, the data that's in data.census.gov is the most up to date. So while New York City has wonderful tools like New York City Population Fact Finder, there's a lag time sometimes between when our data is updated and when they can get their data to populate in that system. Does that make sense? There's a lot of data
Yes.
from that the Census Bureau provides that is then pulled through APIs and other methods into other websites. But when you want to find sort of the latest and greatest, it's good to look at data.census.gov.
Okay, I think she said it was okay. And Aiden has a question as well, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
Aiden, shoot.
Hello. Given this is a sort of New York audience, could you just spend a minute talking about the different like tabulation areas?
This is a more New York centric audience, in terms of tabulation areas, what are you interested? I mean, did you see the slide with all the geographies?
Yeah, I don't know that it spoke to the like neighborhood tabulation areas and the community district ones and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we do not do neighborhood in terms of neighborhood. We really stick to the different census geographies that are listed. You can create your own tabulation areas through you can take a number of census tracts and then tabulate that data separately by exporting it. Or you can select different tracts for different states, but we will not combine and tabulate the area into a separate table. Does that make sense? I
think so. I guess I was under the impression that
there's also Aidan. We're happy to talk to you offline. Unfortunately we're getting close to time.
I put our emails at the bottom again.
Okay.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much. That was a great event.
Thank you.